All right, so today we're going to dig into something pretty amazing, an ancient blueprint. We're talking about the design for the Israelite temple, laid out in the book of 1 Kings. But look, this isn't an architecture class. We're on a mission to uncover this incredible theological secret that's been hidden in its walls all along.
So you gotta wonder, right? You're reading through the Bible, and you hit these sections in Exodus, Kings, Ezekiel, and it's just chapter after chapter after chapter detailing the tabernacle and then the temple. What is all the fuss about? Why spend so much ancient ink on one building? It seems like a lot. Unless, of course, it's all pointing to something way, way bigger.
And here it is, the big secret right up front. The whole point of the physical temple, all those blueprints, all those ceremonies, it was all to paint a picture of a much deeper truth. The Apostle Paul spells it out for us in Ephesians. The end game was never a building made of stone. It was always for God to make his home, his dwelling, inside the human heart. That right there, that's the key that's going to unlock everything we're about to look at.
To really get this, we're going to zoom in on what you could call the temple's finest hour, the dedication ceremony led by King Solomon himself. You know, if asking for wisdom was his first shining moment, this right here is his second. This is Solomon at his absolute best, and he seems to get what this building is really all about.
First off, the timing of this whole thing is fascinating. Solomon chooses to do this during the Feast of Booths, and that is not a random choice. All around them, pagan cultures were having their festivals to try and appease some dying god so they'd get a good harvest. But Israel, they were doing something completely different. They were remembering God's goodness to them. And, this is crucial, they were remembering their own sin and how much they needed him. The contrast is just night and day.
So the ceremony begins, and the writer slows things way down. We get a full 9 verses dedicated to just one action, bringing the covenant box, or the ark, into the most sacred room, the Holy of Holies. The reason for all this detail is that this box is literally the heart of the matter. It represents the covenant, the relationship, and it's the very spot where God said, "I will meet you."
And then, just as the priests are leaving that inner room, something absolutely extraordinary happens. A cloud fills the entire temple. Now, we're not talking about a little bit of fog. The text says that the priests could not do their jobs because of the cloud. They couldn't even get back in. So what kind of cloud is so physically real you can't walk through it?
Well, the text calls this cloud the glory of the Lord. And we have to be careful with that word, because in English, glory sounds kind of fleeting, right? Like a beautiful sunset. But the Hebrew word here is kabod, and kabod means weight, substance. It comes from a root word meaning heavy. It's even related to the word for the liver, the heaviest organ in the body. So this wasn't some light show. This was the tangible, weighty reality of God's presence filling the room.
And that's why this analogy of a brick wall is just so perfect. When the kabod, the glory of God, filled that temple, it wasn't like walking into a misty room. It was like walking face first into a solid barrier. It was the sheer solidity of God's own being, so real and so tangible that it physically pushed the priests out of the way. This place was about encountering the undeniable reality of God.
So, if the temple is filled with this incredible, tangible presence, what's it actually for? Is it all about rituals and sacrifices? To figure that out, we have to look at the main event of the dedication, Solomon's prayer.
And as he starts to pray, one phrase just keeps popping up, over and over again. Solomon says the temple is built for God's name. He says it 5 times in just 5 verses. Now, when an ancient writer repeats something that much in such a short space, he's holding up a giant neon sign that says, hey, this is important.
So what does it even mean to build a house for a name? In the ancient world, your name wasn't just a label. It was your reputation. It was your character. It was the truth of who you are. So Solomon is declaring, this temple isn't a place to manipulate God. It's a place built to put the truth about God's nature on display for the whole world to see.
And this is where it gets absolutely stunning. In this long, detailed prayer about what the temple is for, there is not one single mention of animal sacrifice. Not a word. Think about that for a second. The number one thing we associate with a temple is completely absent from Solomon's description of its purpose. It's like a huge hint that this whole system of animal sacrifice was never the final plan. Solomon gets it. Rituals don't control God.
So if it's not about sacrifice, what is it about? Solomon says it plain and simple. It's a place where God will hear the prayer your servant prays. The temple's primary job is to be a house of prayer, a point of connection, a communication hub, where God invites his people to come and talk to him.
And what are they supposed to talk to him about? Everything. Solomon lists 7 different scenarios. It's everything from being wronged by your neighbor to getting defeated in battle, from drought to disease, even when a foreigner, an outsider, prays, or when the people are in exile. The temple is the go-to place for every single crisis, for every part of life. It's a place to bring the whole messy range of human experience to God.
After this incredible prayer, Solomon turns, he stands up, and he blesses all the people. And in this blessing, he just reinforces the exact nature of the God whose name this temple is supposed to be showing off.
He highlights 3 core truths about God's character. First, he's a God who keeps his word. Not a single one of his good promises has ever failed. Second, he gives his people rest. And third, he will never leave them or forsake them. That is the reputation, that is the name that this temple represents.
So what does Solomon ask this promise-keeping God to do? It's not for more money or more power. He asks for 2 things. First, that God would turn the people's hearts toward him, so they would actually want to walk in obedience. And second, that God would uphold their cause and provide for them according to each day's need. Kind of sounds like, give us this day our daily bread, doesn't it?
Solomon prays that their hearts would be fully committed. In some older translations, it says perfect toward God. The Hebrew word behind all that is related to shalom. Now, we hear shalom and we think peace, the absence of conflict, but it's so much bigger than that. It means completeness, wholeness, being put back together. He's praying for undivided hearts, hearts that are completely and wholly in sync with God.
Okay, so let's bring this all back to where we started. We have a temple filled with the tangible reality of God, a building designed not for ritual, but for a real relationship, a place to show off God's promise-keeping character, all for his people to have undivided hearts. What in the world does this all mean for you and me?
Well, at the end of the day, the temple was always a physical picture of a spiritual reality. The goal isn't just a set of rules or a neat theological system. At its very core, it's about a living, breathing relationship with God, an open invitation to talk with him about every single part of your life. And that brings us to the final, absolutely breathtaking connection. The New Testament takes this whole idea and makes it intensely personal. That glory, that tangible, weighty, brick wall reality of God's presence is no longer confined to a building. The final destination for that kabod, for that glory, is inside you. Christ in you, the hope of glory. So we're going to end with this question. That ancient temple was filled with the kabod of God, his tangible, weighty presence. If the human heart is now the place he's chosen to dwell, then the real question for us is, how real is he in our lives? How much of that weighty, substantial, life-altering presence are we actually allowing to take up residence within us?